Iran thought it had figured out the game. Stall the negotiations, keep the strait closed, run out the clock, wait for the midterms, watch the MAGA coalition fracture under $5 a gallon gas and the political weight of a war that isn't ending. That was the plan. That was always the plan. And then something happened. Something that nobody saw coming. 3 phone calls, 3 Gulf leaders, and the scheduled American assault in Iran that was 24 hours from launch stood down. Stick me to the very end of this video because we're about to find out why the Gulf states just pulled off perhaps the single most brilliant diplomatic maneuver in the modern Middle East and why it just ended Iran as we know it. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. All right, let's set the stage because this story really only makes sense if you understand the full context of what we've been watching build for the last 2 months. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed since late February when American and Israeli strikes decapitated Iran's military and political leadership, and the IRGC retaliated by blockading the world's most critical energy choke point. 20% of the world's seaborne oil used to pass through that narrow strip of water every single day. It's been shut for months. Gas prices in America have climbed more than $1 a gallon. Brent crude briefly touched $95 a barrel. At the same time, by late March, Iran had launched over 3,000 attacks on Gulf Arab states, hitting Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE with drones and missiles. The UAE had drones near its Barakat nuclear plant just days ago. Saudi Arabia was intercepting Iranian projectiles entering from Iraq this very week. So let me paint the picture for you as clearly as I can. The Gulf states have been getting bombed by Iran for the last 2 months. And now we just got reports, in fact, President Trump just confirmed this, that these very same Gulf states that Iran has been bombing just picked up the phone and asked Donald Trump not to bomb Iran back this week. Trump has signaled that he was ready to resume bombing of Iran because of their stall tactics. But these very same Gulf states are asking for more time. Why? Why on earth would Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar, nations that have spent the last 3 months or so as Iran's target practice, step in to save Iran from a full American assault? The answer to that question reveals something very profound about what's actually happening in the Middle East right now. And it's not what the legacy media is trying to spin. To understand the Gulf intervention, you've got to understand the Abraham Accords, not as a peace deal, but as a strategic architecture. That's absolutely key here. When Donald Trump brokered the Abraham Accords in 2020, what he was really building wasn't a feel-good handshake. He was building a lasting regional framework. Israeli military and intelligence muscle, plus Arab economic power and American strategic backing, equals a regional order that contains Iran without requiring a catastrophic full-scale war. The vision was never bomb Iran into the Stone Age in one blow. The vision was structural deterrence, a network of shared interests, intelligence relationships, air defense integration, and commercial partnerships so deep, so interlocking, that Iran would eventually find itself strategically suffocated, unable to threaten, unable to export terrorism, unable to enrich uranium, not because it was completely obliterated, but because it was encircled. And what just happened, 3 Gulf phone calls to Trump, a pause in the strike, is not a departure from that vision. What we have to understand is that it is that vision, operating at its most sophisticated level. Here's the key insight that nobody's reporting. The Gulf states did not call Trump because they felt sorry for Iran. Obviously, they don't. These Sunni nations would love nothing more than to see these Shiite radicals eliminated. Instead, They called Trump because a full-scale American assault on Iran right now in this specific moment would have destroyed the very architecture that they've been building. I mean, think about what that strike would actually mean for the Gulf. Not for Iran, for the Gulf. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has bet his entire legacy on Vision 2030. Tourism, tech, financial diversification, a post-oil Saudi Arabia that's a global destination and investment hub, a full-blown regional war that triggers the last remaining Iranian missile salvos on Riyadh, that shuts down Saudi ports, that sends oil markets into chaos, that scares away every Western investor who is finally beginning to take the kingdom seriously. That doesn't just cost money, it kills the vision entirely. Similarly, for the UAE, the stakes are equally existential. Dubai is a key transit port for trade with Iran. The two countries share robust commercial ties, and the UAE just signed an $8.4 billion arms deal with Washington. They're not a country that can afford to be in the middle of a regional inferno. For Qatar, there's an even more direct financial stake. Doha shares with Iran the world's largest natural gas reservoir, the South Pars North Dome field. And Iran reduced to rubble is an Iran that can no longer be a business partner, an energy partner, or even a stabilizing presence, however complicated, across the Gulf. These three nations have decided rationally and strategically that a destroyed Iran is actually worse for them than a contained Iran. But at the same time, they also sent a message to Tehran. They made very clear that any Iranian retaliatory attacks on U.S. facilities in the Gulf would have consequences for Iran's relationships with those same Gulf nations. Iran is going to need the help of these Gulf nations to rebuild desperately as it economically suffocates. In other words, the Gulf countries are squeezing both sides simultaneously. They're pressing Washington to pause the military option, and they're pressing Tehran not to exploit that pause. That's not weakness. That's diplomacy at a level of sophistication that frankly should be astonishing to anyone paying attention. And it could never have happened without the Trump-brokered Abraham Accords. But it gets even richer because we now know that these very same Gulf countries have been conducting covert airstrikes against Iran. The same countries lobbying on behalf of Iran are also lobbing bombs into Iran. What on earth is going on here? Well, that's exactly what we're about to find out. But first, you have got to go right now to turleytraining.com because we're living through a time when a lot of people are beginning to realize something important. The old economic system, the one that told you to work harder, grind longer, and depend on institutions that frankly don't have your best interests in mind, is starting to break down. And you see it everywhere. Inflation, instability, and a growing sense that the system is increasingly designed for the benefit of a very small group at the top. And whenever we see moments like this historically, something interesting always happens. Ordinary people begin looking for ways to create independence from the system rather than depend on it. And that's why I want to invite you to a free training with someone I know personally, a good friend of mine named Ryan, who's been quietly building what he calls the perfect lifestyle business that takes advantage of the new hidden economy. What's fascinating about it is that it's probably not what you think of when you hear about online business, right? In fact, when he first explained it to me, I'll be honest, it sounded a little, weird. But then he showed me the results, and I immediately got excited because it's working so well right now in 2026. And the part that really caught my attention is that it takes him less than 30 minutes a day to actually run and operate, with no advertising to run, no social media marketing to worry about, no employees to hire, no inventory to buy, no websites to build, and you don't need any technical background to get started. So I asked Ryan to break this down for you step by step, and we're hosting a free private training where you can see exactly how this works, because this is about creating real independence at a time when more people are starting to question the system altogether. So if you want to see how this hidden economy works and decide if this is the right strategy for you, go to turleytraining.com and reserve your spot right now, because you already know the world is changing. More people are stepping outside the system, not by chance, but by choice. And this is one of those opportunities to do exactly that. Learn more at turleytraining.com. At the exact same moment, the Gulf states were on the phone with Trump asking him to stand down militarily. We're now finding out that Saudi Arabia and the UAE were indeed conducting covert offensive strikes inside Iran. It's not speculation. That's been confirmed by both Reuters and the New York Times, citing U.S. officials. So let that sit with you for a moment. The same nations asking Trump to pause the air assault are themselves quietly hitting targets inside Iranian territory. The same nations Iran has been bombing for months chose diplomacy in Washington and covert action in Tehran simultaneously. This proves they're not protecting Iran, they are managing Iran. They are applying pressure precisely where they want it and releasing pressure precisely where it benefits their long-term strategic interests. This is the Abraham Accords architecture operating in the region at full maturity. Think about what's changed since 2020 when the Abraham Accords were first signed. So back then, the architecture was theoretical. The Gulf states would normalize relations with Israel, share intelligence, coordinate on air defense, and together with Washington, deter Iran through strength. Iran laughed it off. They called it a paper agreement between American client states who would fold the moment real pressure arrived. Well, that pressure has arrived. And the Gulf states obviously didn't fold. They evolved. The RUSI security think tank documented just this month that UAE Israel military coordination has actually deepened during the war. Joint air defense operations, intelligence sharing on drone threats, technology transfer. Israel's muscle proved real. And now the Arab partners in this architecture are developing offensive capabilities of their own, conducting strikes inside Iran that would have been literally unthinkable 5 years ago. That's not the Abraham Accords plateauing. That's the Abraham Accords graduating literally to the next level. Now, does this mean that Iran is off the hook? Absolutely not. Let's be crystal clear about where Iran actually stands right now, because the pause in the American strike does not mean Iran has escaped its predicament. Far from it. Iran's main oil export terminal at Karg Island has had essentially zero loading activity in nearly 2 months. The U.S. naval blockade is holding. Iran's storage tanks are full. Satellite photos show Iran beginning to physically shut down oil production because there's literally nowhere left to put the oil. No ships getting in, no ships getting out. Iran's oil economy is not just hurting, it is beginning to literally physically stop. And that's before you factor in that China, Iran's last great patron, has publicly aligned with the United States, calling for the strait to remain open and expressing interest in replacing Iranian crude with American oil. Both pillars of Iran's survival strategy, Russia and China, have cracked simultaneously. The IRGC closed the Strait of Hormuz thinking that they were hitting America by spiking oil prices. They were actually hurting China, their last patron. And China noticed. Iran thought China was on its side. Well, it turns out Xi Jinping is on his own side, or China's side, however you want to put it. So here's what the big picture actually looks like right now. And I want you to hold this in your mind because really it's genuinely historic. You have Israel providing the military and intelligence backbone of a regional anti-Iranian coalition. You have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar providing the economic muscle, the diplomatic cover, and increasingly the covert strike capability. You've got the United States providing the overwhelming military deterrent and the naval blockade. You've got China under pressure from a closed strait, publicly supporting the American position that Iran must stand down and the strait has to be reopened. And then, of course, you've got Russia in the background, bogged down in Ukraine, completely unable to provide Iran meaningful support. Iran is surrounded economically, diplomatically, militarily. And the trap wasn't set in the last 2 months. The trap was actually set back in September of 2020 when the Abraham Accords were signed and Trump began building a Middle Eastern architecture designed to do exactly this. The Gulf states' phone calls to Trump weren't a lifeline for Iran. They were the architects of that trap, making sure the trap closes cleanly at a time and in a manner that serves the long-term strategic vision rather than a moment of expedient rage. The Gulf states handed Trump a strategic pause. They did not hand Iran an escape. The Abraham Accords architecture is working. The trap is closing. And Iran is about to find out that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a full American assault. It's a patient, methodical, multi-front strategic encirclement that was planned in Washington, built in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Jerusalem, and Doha, and that has been running perfectly this entire time.